planetary health basically is a link between, is a link between land, environment, and human beings, so human well-being. How do we use, control land to be able to have a quality of life? Now, when you speak about land tenure system, it is basically the manner in which land is apportioned, is controlled, is used by the people who live in that piece of land. And I thought it is important to simplify this by dividing it into three categories. As I speak about the Kenyan context, so I'll speak to the issue of the pre-colonial context, the pre-colonial land tenure system, the colonial period, as well as the post-colonial, and where we are today. Then I narrow down to the Ma people and their relationship with land. Now, the Kenyan population are definitely Africans who are very communal in nature. Before the colonial times, the land system was colonial. Was communal. Everyone had access to land, and everyone could use that land either to till or to look after their livestock, access water, energy, which was firewood. And all you needed was to be a member of a community for you to be able to access that land and make use of that land. And communities lived together. They were defined by language, music, food, and art. And that formed a cultural bond that formed a community. One community had a territorial boundary that they were able to use. The Maasai, for instance, use their lands to be able to, to graze their animals. And they demarcated it in such a way that there are settlement areas and the areas that were reserved for livestock grazing. Then arrived the colonialists in the 19th century, who exported statutes from Great Britain. These were pieces of legislation that were going to encourage more whites to go to the colonies of the Great Britain by ensuring that they enjoyed similar, if not better, terms or conditions in terms of ownership of property than they did in the UK or in the Great Britain then. One of such statute was that Kenya was converted into a private company. Okay, the East Africa Protectorate, which then became a property of the Queen of England. Now, land and the people therein were the
Let's give it a few minutes so you think there's some connectivity issues on his end, but I believe he'll be...
Yeah, I am back. Sorry, I'm not sure whether it is my end or your end. So, statutes are codified pieces of legislation. These are pieces of law that revolutionized the manner in which land was controlled, used by the local communities. And this saw the introduction of registration of land in terms of calling it, this is my parcel, this is private land. There was nothing like trespass in the local communities. What else did this bring about? Commoditization of land, where land was now realized to be a property that can change hands from one individual to another. And this saw the advent of private land ownership. In the Kenyan context, other than the white settlers who had access to huge chunks of land, there was parcels of land apportioned to individuals or given to individuals in term and the idea was some zones, buffer zones, to be able to reduce, if not eradicate, conflicts between communities or traditional communities or communal parcels of land. Then in 1963, Kenya got independence, and we enacted a 1963 piece of legislation, also known as Cap 300 Laws of Kenya. For those of you who have title deeds, unless you have transited that title deed to the new regime of registration under the 2010 Constitution, most of the Kenyan title deeds are, except the old ones in the coast region or Nairobi, which were IR, either inland or registered under registration of documents. But majority of them are Cap 300 Laws of Kenya, registration of title deeds. This piece of legislation brought about private ownership of land and introduced at the districts, the Kenyan district levels, what is called the land registration boards, which I will speak to later. This brought about an idea of any Kenyan who has ability to own land would own a piece of it, and therefore a lot of subdivision took place. What remained under Cap 300 Laws of Kenya is mainly parcels of land in Maasai land under what we called, or what was called, a law that was repealed recently, called the Group Representatives Act. Group representatives was land that, or piece of law that was looking at or taking care of group ranches that were ideally meant to transit to community lands under the Community Land Act of 2016. Now, with that, having said that, now Kenyans in 2010 came up with a radical constitution, a very progressive constitution that radically changed the manner in which land is administered, controlled, and used. And a whole chapter in the Constitution is committed to land as one of the most important resources. And it is important to note at this point that land is, in the context of Kenya, perhaps the most important means of production. It is inelastic and therefore does not increase in any way. This is one of the key characteristics of land. You can multiply money, You can multiply your livestock, buy more, and there will be many, but land remains inelastic. It is also indestructible. You cannot completely destroy land and put it in the trash like you would destroy a motor vehicle or anything else. It is also important to note that land is under a lot of pressure as we get population increase in Kenya. And therefore, the same parcel of land, and this is why this point is very important, which had fewer people use it, control it, access other resources like water, energy, and now have multiplied in numbers, and therefore there is population pressure. Having said that, the Kenyan 2010 Constitution introduced various pieces of legislation that were to give effect to the Constitution. One of them is the National Land Commission Act, which is mandated to take care of public land. And public land is defined in the Constitution and in that act, and it gives effect to Article 67 of the Constitution. The other one is the Land Act and the Land Registration Act. But I want to speak to the issue of the 2016 law, which is basically the Community Land Act. Community Land Act is the one that transited Group Representatives Act to communities, so that land, although categorized into three, private, public, and community, under Article 61. So there is private land, which is vested in the private owner, the person who has the title deed. And I think it is important to note, for the interest of the audience, that a title deed is not necessarily the certificate you get. It's not a piece of paper. Title deed is a right. It is what the law refers to as interest in land. What kind of interest do you have? You could have a freehold interest. You could have a leasehold. You could have an easement, which is basically right of way to access the river or road or that kind of thing. So that is what it is. So the Community Land Act basically recognizes communities that jointly own land. And it is important to note that these communities ought to be registered and have a very defined way of looking at the use and control of land. So the land tenure system has basically changed the manner in which land was used, and the planetary health is affected by a group of people. And the communal, for example, the Maasai, traditional Maasai land practices, is one of them is communal grazing and mobility. Our people, and allow me, Nightingale, to say our people, because that's where I come from. The Maasais are basically were nomads for the longest time until the land tenure changed to the extent that today I cannot move my cows as freely as I would, as my dad did, because today individuals have title deeds and they have rights entrenched in the Constitution and other statutes that gives them what the law calls a good title. A good title under the maxims of property is one that is a title against the entire world, beneath the surface to hell, and above the surface to the heavens. That's a good title. And it is basically a maxim that has exceptions so that you cannot stop a plane from overflying your house because you own a good title. No, every general rule or rule of the thumb has exceptions. This is one of the exceptions. So the communal grazing and mobility has been affected. But then the Maasais are known for sustainable land use rooted in cultural values. Sustainable land use, which is rooted in the values of the community or cultural values. One such is the fact that the Maasais would move with the cows. They had no use mainly for manure that comes from the cows, other than the women would use it to as mud to make the huts, the Maasai manyatas. The architects and the engineers in the Maasai tradition are the women. Our mothers would make the manyatas that we lived in. So sustainable use of land, because imagine that manure, they are moving from one place to another, and the cows would enrich the soil, and there were not as many as I think they are today. There was also rational grazing to preserve biodiversity and soil health, so that the Maasais did not just graze cows anyhowly or arbitrarily. Let me use arbitrarily. They subdivided land, or they zoned. The word is zoning. Land was zoned in such a way that you can only graze cows in a certain place, but you can't go to others until a certain month of the year. As when I was growing up as a young boy, we would be beaten up if we grazed cows in some places that were reserved for the drier months of the year. So there was zoning, and zoning was clear. There were settlement areas, and there were areas that were reserved for grazing. And this is very important in preserving biodiversity. There were also sacred spaces, and these spaces were retained for cultural ceremonies, traditional ceremonies, which were milestones in anybody's life. And then there was respect for water places or water sources, such that nobody would come to build a funny looking story building at the water source like we would today, or even better still, come and make or lay claim on a water source, like what the modern tenure system has done. In the communal system, no single individual will lay claim on a water source. It was for all to access and to make use of it. Now, the modern land control changes include the land subdivision and privatization, which I said has commoditized land, and we now look at land as a very valuable commodity. And that's why you find counties like Narok and Kajiado, a lot of land sales where people are using it as a commodity. Sadly, some group ranches transited from the Group Representatives Act and were gazetted before the Community Land Act came into being or into force, and they were like hawking some title deeds when it transited to private. You go to places like some parts of Kajiado Central, Mailua Group Ranch, Birikani Group Ranch, among others, you find that a lot of senseless sales and subdivision that, in my humble opinion, was totally uncalled for. So that subdivision and privatization has destabilized the manner in which previously there was sustainable use and biodiversity and preserve of biodiversity. We have also seen creation of conservancies and national parks. This is a new way to go, where the conservancies are now coming into being, and we have also seen the resurgence of agreements with the local communities on this, and it is something to watch out for. There is also expansion of commercial farming and real estate. You have seen in the Kenyan context, counties like Kiambu, where a lot of cash crops like coffee is being uprooted to be able to do houses for sale. And this has also changed the land tenure and land use. And we are changing from green to more of concrete in the spaces, you know. Impact on traditional grazing routes. As I said earlier, the privatization has now reduced or has taken away easement rights. Today, my cows can only access easement. For example, a water source is my parcel doesn't touch a water source like a river, and it is in most rivers in the arsal areas, in semi-arid areas are actually dry. They are not. They don't have water throughout the year. So when there is some water, or you have to dig a shallow well, if you have to access that, then you have to speak nicely to the neighbor whose parcel touches the river, because you have lost the easement rights that were there before. So that control is not the same as it used to be. So traditional grazing routes have been affected. The environmental consequences by these effects of these changes in the land tenure system, in my opinion, include loss of biodiversity, depletion of water resources, and pressure due to population, as well as increased carbon emissions. For the Maasai communities, I see things like loss of medicinal plants and traditional healing. We, as a country, enacted a piece of legislation in 2016 that hopefully someday I will have time to speak to that piece of law. Is called the Protection of Traditional Knowledge and Cultural Expressions Act of 2016. Kenya is one of the few countries that have such piece of legislation that has codified or enabled traditional communities to codify traditional knowledge and cultural expressions, such as plants that have medicinal value. So in pharmaceutical terms, it would be called pharmacognosy, Protection of Traditional Knowledge and Cultural Expressions Act. So loss of these medicinal plants and traditional healing is of great importance, and this has really affected it. It has also affected traditional weather forecasting and resource planning. Previously, the traditional setup in the traditional context, Maasai's or basically Africans looked at the stars to be able to determine or to be able to look at weather forecast. You looked at the stars, you looked at the how some animals, both livestock and the wild animals, behaved because we lived with them. So how they conducted themselves, would tell you whether the rains are around the corner or not. Before some traditional communities would beat the drums to invite the gods of rain, they will have seen how insects behaved, some plants are flowering, some animals conduct themselves in a manner that would be able to, the Africans would be able to read and say the rain is around the corner. This weather forecasting and resource planning has been affected by the modern, in quotes, land tenure system. So the opportunities for climate adaptation have also been greatly affected. And I think the way forward is to this group, such as Acopphe, to integrate indigenous land practices into national land policy would be one of the issues. And when I talk about land policy, it doesn't necessarily have to be a national piece of legislation. It could be Kenya having counties, and you guys are in Narok, from Narok County Assembly or Narok County Government. How can you influence some policy on land use? Because some of aspects of land control and land use are devolved. Survey is devolved. The only thing that is not zoning is there are laws for use of land that are devolved. The only thing is land registration. Land registration or registration of title deeds remains a national responsibility. So I think it will also be important to collaborate with, to have collaborative conservation with the communities, the governments, and NGOs. So, that would be a good thing to look at. My recommendations: protect communal grazing zones, and counties can actually do zoning. The county governments have basically a number of plans. The most important plan is called a spatial plan, which is required under the PFMA, Public Finance Management Act, and other county laws, the County Governments Act, CGA 2012. A spatial plan, any county government ought to have a spatial plan. The last time I checked, only about 9 counties had a spatial plan. A spatial plan is one that is a plan for 10 years, and it defines zoning so that in counties like Narok and in Narok town, the plan would define areas for industrial developments, residentials, public spaces, and that kind of thing. That piece of legislation, that plan is or speaks to a 5-year plan called the CIDP, the County Integrated Development Plan. And the CIDP informs the ADP, which is called the Annual Development Plan. So those plans are of critical importance. I think it is also important to invest in eco-friendly pastoral systems. It is about time that we change our way of doing things. Our nomadism is not tenable anymore, and therefore to be able to do pastoralism in a more eco-friendly way and in line with modern times. Also public participation, which the courts of Kenya have spoken very loudly about in terms of how communities and those who are governed must be involved in making some critical decisions, and in this particular case, in land use planning, ensure that communities are used. I conclude by saying land control affects or influences both the environment and human health. Okay? And Maasai's traditions offer models for sustainability, and we are. It is important to blend indigenous and modern practices and strengthen planetary health. With that, I will take a few questions, and I beg to stop at this. Thank you very much. Nightingale, can you hear me?
Yes, I do hear you. And I just froze for a very brief moment. Asante sana. I see some people appreciating in chat with claps, and just to say we really, really appreciate you sharing about the land tenure system, and especially when it comes to the Kenyan context. So I want to see if there are any people that may have questions in this regard. And I also will be looking at chat to see if there are also any questions or any comments that are there. So for Mr. Johnson, still sorry. Yeah, I think I want to just start off by saying there's a Olomunyak Timothy who says in chat, and anybody else who would like to say something, if you can either raise up your hand and or put your comments, questions in chat, so that we can get them to Mr. Osoi. We are also thinking that it would still be a good idea for us to do a quick breakout just for a few minutes. And I ask you to not be shy. You don't have to put out to show your videos if that bothers you. But if we have more of a conversation here, more questions, then we might just keep it that way instead of going to breakout rooms. So yeah, let me see. Timothy Olomunyak, you're saying makes one wonder, was sustainability ever a concern? Or what were the visionary ideas of shifting from the previous land tenure systems? Its justifications notwithstanding.
Very well. Olomunyak, thank you very much for that question. Remember that shifting from the communal land tenure system to what I call the modern land tenure system was not anybody's option. The Africans had no option. The statutes were imported or, exported from Great Britain or Commonwealth for Commonwealth countries, and they were not meant for Africans in the first place. The Dalameas, if you know, it was meant to serve the interests of the colonial masters, and they were the first ones to introduce that kind of land tenure system. However, for the Africans, sustainability was never an issue because we didn't have the kind of things that industrialization has brought. There were no factories or industries. The population was still low. And therefore, I wouldn't think any of our forefathers or great-grandfathers thought about sustainability in that context. But the use of land, the control of land was very sustainable in the manner in which they used it, because remember, they did not subdivide it. So it didn't belong to an individual. It belonged to a community. The land belonged to a community, and therefore it was sustainable, in my opinion.
Thanks so much for that feedback. Timothy Olomunyak, I hope you were able to hear most of what Mr. Johnson. some mishaps. But for the most part, we got your response. Questions for Mr. Osoy, because you know he's a lawyer, and so you can push back and because it doesn't mean that he is perfect, as good as he is. But
Sorry,
to see if
Nightingale, I didn't hear that. I had a knock on my room, and so I had to see who it was. So I lost you for a minute.
No problem. I am just appreciating you, but also welcoming people to give feedback, but also to know that they can push back on you. I think you can handle that, because as good as you are, it doesn't mean you're perfect.
Fair enough, and I have no monopoly of knowledge whatsoever. I can also learn from the audience. Yes, I am an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. I practice law in Nairobi. I can answer a few questions, and if there is any that I need to perhaps make some reference, I will say so.
Okay, yes. So I'm wanting to see, there are a few people that I think may have some questions, but I will just say them by name before I can. Mr. Olakisier,
Nightingale, I see you telling me to share my thoughts and questions. Or was it meant for the audience? With the
Yes,
complexities with their own title deeds or my title deeds?
Yes, I was inviting the audience to, you can hear me okay, Mr. Oso?
Yes. Loud and clear.
Okay, we just okay. Yeah, so I am just inviting people to ask questions, because especially for the Kenyan population, this is a really important conversation. And I know that amongst us, we do have people who may have even individual questions. And I felt that even though you may not answer the question, like, you know, broadly, you may still have some feedback. But I see that we have Melanie, who has her hand raised up. So please, Melanie, welcome.
Hi there. Thank you so much for this great conversation, because it really helps to understand the backbone of land use in Kenya, and all the limits and the regulations that the colonialism has done to the country. And so as Kenya is unwinding from this process, I wanted to ask you, sir, besides working at the county levels that you mentioned, what are some of the other areas on the policy level that both climate youth can direct their energies, as well as global interests as well, especially for Kenya? Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Melanie. I'm not sure whether I take this question or I invite more questions and then I take them together. Nightingale?
Yes, let's do that.
Yeah, let's have maybe 2 more or 3 more, and then I can respond.
That sounds good. I have my son Kipila asking, what is the difference between community and public lands, giving by examples? So, any more questions? And you can feel free to just unmute in case, because I know that some of us may not have that, the icons, or our phones may not allow that. So if you have any questions for your speaker today, just unmute and ask a question. Timothy, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Nightingale. I hope you can hear me. I just had one follow-up question. I think now trying to look where we came from, and that Africans really just adopted the new land tenure system from the colonizers, and that is like where we are at now. And there is this point being mentioned, perhaps maybe what will come as a rider to the question just asked by Mason about the different community and public lands, and then the issue of group ranches. That would mean like there is still some land that is still being held not in an individual perspective, but I don't know whether to call it group or still community in some way. Maybe you'll get that clarity. But like in terms of a balance, maybe would we say that you would rather perhaps have those groups maintain those like lands that are still not perhaps subdivided? Would we rather maintain them, or then we just like divide anything in terms of like trying to strike perhaps a balance between retaining the initial way and perhaps the current advancement that have happened, especially with the contemporary issues that we're facing these days? Talk of things like on these group ranch issues, and this land being really like sometimes even like sought after by different people. We nowadays have these issues of carbon credits, and they want to like just like fence off some good chunk of land. Like, what could be the point? Perhaps, Mr. Johnson, would we rather maintain them at that state, or do we still subdivide lands and accommodate people and the changing population densities and such? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Timothy. I do have two other questions, but maybe we can do. Daniel Lola shows tasks there, or says there has been conflict between private ranchers and the community in Laikipia over pastures, especially during prolonged drought, as pastoralists try to invade the larger tracts of land of private ranchers. How can we resolve the conflict and enhance cohesion and coexistence? And this is with the assumption that a lot of these private ranchers are actually also not originally people from that land. So my son Kipila also asks.
Yes, I can.
Yeah.
I'm actually reading the questions, so
okay. Yeah.
Yes, on the chat box, so I'm able to see that. Let me start with Mason Kipila's questions. The first one being classification of land, the difference between community and public land. Now, Kipila, at your own time, look at our small booklet, the Constitution. Article 61 says, and I quote, "All land in Kenya belongs to the people of Kenya and collectively as a nation, as communities, and as individuals." The import of that provision is that there is land owned as a nation, there is land owned as communities, and there is land owned as individuals. Meaning, public land is owned by all of us as a nation. And public land is land which is at the effective date annihilated government land. For example, land occupied by the military, land occupied by our airports is public land. Lawfully held, used, or occupied by state organs is land, is public land. Land transferred to the state by way of sale, reversion, or surrender. A private land can be, or community can revert to the state, and that becomes public land. All minerals and mineral oils as defined by law. So Kipila, if you have a private ranch, and then suddenly the state of Kenya discovers that you have so much oil deposits underneath, that land automatically reverts to the state, and that becomes public land. So that is public. Community land, on the other hand, is vested in and held by communities identified on the basis of ethnicity, culture, or similar community interests. Okay? I said earlier, a culture may be defined as a people's, a complex whole that defines a people's culture, which includes food, art, music, language, that can be loosely said to be, attributes of an ethnic community. Now, land owned jointly by this or vested in this consists of land lawfully registered in the name of group representatives under the provisions of the law. So Kipila, Group Representatives Act is the piece of legislation that was used to register group ranches. So a group ranch falls under what we call community land. Land transferred to specific community by any process of law, any land declared to be community land by an act of parliament, and land lawfully held, managed, or used specific communities as community forests, grazing areas, or shrines. And I'm reading Article 61(2)(d), Roman 1, okay? Ancestral lands, lawfully held as trust land by the county governments. Those are called community lands. I hope I have answered the question on the difference between community land and public lands. Melanie asked me what I think the kind of policy or pieces of legislation that would be relevant at the county level. Having worked for county governments, and I had the privilege of serving at the advent or the beginning of county governments in Kenya in 2013 for 20 years, for 10 years, sorry, 10 years. So I served for 2 terms as a speaker of one of the county legislatures, and also had the privilege of serving as chairperson of all the county assemblies of the Republic of Kenya. And so having been at the forefront for devolution, there is what we call schedules. The schedule 4, fourth schedule of our constitution, part 2, lists devolved functions. And as far as land is concerned, it remains a responsibility of both the federal government, if you like, or national government, and the regional governments to ensure that planning is properly done. One of the policy frameworks that I think the youth today can push for is to ensure that counties enact a physical planning county law. Physical planning is devolved. Barely does any county have a law on physical planning. That law would be derived from what I spoke to earlier. I alluded to the fact that counties need to have a spatial plan. So we still don't have laws that bite in the county, so that you don't just put up your manyatta or bring your cows to Narok town, and the cows are just grazing outside the governor's office or the referral hospital, because the planning is not properly enforced. One, counties don't have a policy or a law, or the few who have are not enforcing that. So I think it is, Melanie, that's one of the areas the youth can look at planning. I always say it is important to look at our use of our lands and control. And as county governments, and I used to tell my governor this, but I'm not sure whether he listened to me, that's a story for another day, that it is important that those in office today plan those counties as though they will be here 200 years from now. Where will the highway be? If they're able to do a metro in 80 years from now, where will that be? Where will the schools be? So, Melanie, I think policies on planning would be the way to go. When talking about, this is Mason Steele, when talking about trust lands or group ranches, which category do they fall into? I spoke about this under the Constitution. Group ranches fall under community land. Trust land is still land held in trust by county governments, and therefore it will fall under what we call community land. Like the private land has title deeds, the community and public lands, what kind of titles do they have? Very good question. The community land is supposed to be registered under the new piece of legislation called the Community Land Act. And a community is registered, and that community registers the parcel of land, and then the land is registered under the community. What happens in such is that the community has officials, because you can't have a whole community with a list of names on a title deed. It is the same as group ranches. The title deed is one, but it's called a mother title, and on it is attached a list of members. So the list of members of the community will have that land. For public land, there are title deeds that are held in state organ names. For example, the DOD has a title deed for the property, DOD, Kenya Airports Authority for that of the airport, and therefore they are public lands have title deeds in the names of state agencies that own that land. The last question, who then becomes the holder? The holder of what? Who is this? Hillary. Hillary. Who becomes the holder? The holder of a title deed? Hillary, are you there?
Yes, good evening. Yes, I'm there. I had a question while you were answering my son's question about the title deeds for the public lands. So I just had a quick question of who then is allocated to be a holder of the title deeds, and I think you've answered me. But then how do you then protect the few people, let's say if it's 20, how then do you protect these people from taking over the land over time?
Okay, thank you. And I actually thought Hillary was, or is this Hillary you, or Hillary another, Hillary Diana? Okay, thank you, Hillary. You know what I'm saying, thank you. Now, public land is vested in public state agencies. I stated earlier that this is land that is unalienated government land as defined by an act of parliament, okay? Land transferred to the state by way of sale, reversion, or surrender. Land in respect of which no heir can be identified by any legal process. You have heard of something called unclaimed assets, right? So if today there is land whose owner is unknown for some reason, and that land can revert back to the state. Who owns this land? This land is vested in state corporations. For example, and I gave an example of JKIA, Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, sits on a piece of land. Who owns that land? It's not possible for Diana to just become the MD of KQ or KAA, Kenya Airports Authority, and take the land. No, because it is vested in a state corporation. And so they are the owners of that title deed. The word vest means the interest in that land is held by either, in the case of community lands and group ranches, it is the community and the county government in trust. All right? So county government of Narok or Kajiado or Samburu for that matter, that cannot just wake up, the governor cannot wake up and make a declaration that Masai Mara, or I don't know the group ranches in Narok, say there is a group ranch in Majimoto, for example, and say Majimoto group ranch, from now on, it's going to be county government land, and the members have no say. No, it's not possible. It is, they can only hold it in trust and protect it from who? Any attempt by national government, for example. If the national government came to Majimoto and said they want the land for military use, who negotiates on behalf of the community? It is the county government whose, because the law vests the trust in the county government. So I hope you answered.
You're muted.
Oh, James Olekesier. Is it viable or good idea continue divide and further subdivide land to individuals to forever? How long the global mass land can accommodate ever-growing humanity singling out Kenya? James, this is an interesting observation. As we speak, I'm actually doing this presentation from Europe. And one of the interesting things in Europe is, or the West, because I know this is also true for the US to some extent, Nightingale would know better, but the truth is that there are settlement areas and the land is well planned. I think they were where we are today so many centuries, a couple of centuries ago. And then they realized sustainable use of land. You would have to have land that is for settlements, and you have land for forests, because we need to have as many trees, a tree cover of a certain percentage as a country. We need to produce food to be able to feed ourselves. And so, in my opinion, and this is my considered and humble opinion, the continued subdivision, Maguta kind of approach, where Kenyans commoditize land and subdivide even in the rural areas to small, what I call eighths, that 1/8 of land that doesn't make economic sense, is completely out of step and completely unsustainable. In my opinion, this is why I told Melanie, or I answered Melanie, and I said the youth, the young people today can push county governments to plan and be able to have an idea of, say, how do you think that county should look like 200 years from now, even though all of us will not be here? That would be the way to look at it. How sustainable will it be? You see, because the subdivision is completely unsustainable. James Dubberlen, the case study of Turkana communal land when oil was discovered. The land was taken away by the government. Upon the community protests and resistance, the government passed a law, Petroleum Act 2019, that allocates 5% of oil revenues to local communities, but implementation remains inconsistent. James, I said earlier when I spoke about the land tenure system that public land is land that is owned or taken away by government, national government for that matter. And one such land is one that has minerals. And I gave an example. I said if oil deposits are discovered in your land, that land automatically becomes public land because the government will have to compensate you and be able to take over. And that's how the law is. So, and James, you say interesting fact, Texas law allows individuals to own both the surface land and the minerals beneath it. This is due to its history as an independent republic before joining the United States in 1845. So all this problem of land tenure was brought about by the colonial government. Yes, not quite a problem. I think you can imagine if in this era, Kenya or Africa is still under the communal tenure system, where communities rose against each other and fought. And if you look at the works of theorists like a guy called John Locke and Thomas Hobbes, who spoke about primitive state of nature, which is survival for the fittest, where life is brutal, nasty, bloody, and short, because people would have no rule of law. There is no constitution, so it was anarchy. It was the stronger person takes it all. So it is not entirely correct to say the land tenure system that was brought to us is a big problem. I think it is a lack of planning on our part now, and I mean physical planning. I don't mean financial. Planning the land in such a way that we don't allow mushrooming of slums or small plots on agricultural lands, so that because the challenge I see is that we have a very beautifully written laws, but we rarely follow the laws very well. When we say zoning, for example, or agricultural lands, like now in Kenya, the tax for what is called CGT, capital gain tax, agricultural lands ought to be exempt from that kind of tax. However, counties are coming up with what is called municipalities. The municipalities assumes that then that parcel becomes part of a municipality, ceases to be agricultural. And without them being keen on what the import of these laws are, you would find a municipality going 100 kilometers into the interior, which doesn't make sense. Then it introduces CGT, and then it now encourages subdivision into unsustainable small parcels of land. So I think the colonial system would work, in my opinion, by introduction of the law. So rule of law is critical, so that your rights as guaranteed in the Kenyan Constitution, Article 40, gives every Kenyan a right to own property of any nature in any part of the country. That can only be done under the what I call the codified laws. Traditionally, that would not be possible. So it's a question of a balancing act. How do we then ensure that we observe rule of law and we plan for the future? As asked by Lola Shaw, there has been conflict between private ranchers and the community in Laikipia over pastures, especially during prolonged drought, as pastoralists try to invade the larger tracts of land of private ranchers. How can we resolve the conflict and enhance cohesion and coexistence? Nightingale, this is a very I'm not sure I have an answer for this, because whereas there are rights, however, the individuals who own the ranches acquire those rights and what I called interest in land. There are also communities around them, and I think it is not a question of the law, because strict reading of the law would ascertain the ownership and therefore exclude any other person from invading that parcel of land, because the law is blind to other associations other than, the law just looks at who is the owner. But the reality on the ground, and I think the courts have also spoken to this issue, is that it is more of a political issue than legal. And therefore, political interventions, alternative dispute resolution mechanisms can be employed to ensure that there is a resolution to conflicts and enhance coexistence and cohesion. That's my take. Myson Kipila again, I was in TZ the other day. People own land that beneath have minerals. My question is it only applicable in Kenya that when a private land is discovered to have minerals, the government takes it? Every country has its own regime of laws. I will not authoritatively speak about the Tanzanian arrangement, their law, but the Kenyan law, unfortunately, that's the position, that minerals belong to the state, and therefore, and we too belong to the state. Kipila, you actually belong to the Kenyan state, and that is why they guarantee you protection of life, the right to life, and many other things under the Bill of Rights. So I'm not sure about Tanzania for sure, but the Kenyan law is, which is the law that governs our territorial boundaries, our jurisdiction. That is the position. Nathan, the process by which government can officially possess land when it determines a compelling use merits such repossession, such as minerals, routing, or road, etc., is widely recognized globally using the term eminent domain. Yes. In Kenya, we call it compulsory acquisition. So thank you, Nathan, for that. I hope I have answered your questions. Nightingale, are you there?
Yes, I am. Listening keenly and feeling very appreciative. And I think it just took a question or two, and I see the connection on my end is not the best, but Mr. Osoy, thanks so much for taking the time to alone time that you have to this engagement. We really appreciate it, and we value your time, we value you. And what I see is that we have to have a part 2 of this. So this is to be continued. So with this, I want to say that if you have any more questions, like for example, I see Mr. Ola Kessier has some a question, but due to time, I think we can either have Mr. Osoi write back in chat, because I now want to hand it over to Nathan, who will take us through the final part, which is very short, and towards closing. But if you have any questions, we have this page in a way that you can private message Mr. Osoi, so you have direct access to him. And if you have any posts that you would like to make on the main page, please do. But thanking every single one of you for your contributions. It's for ourselves, but I always try to remind myself that it's not for me alone, but it's for those who are coming after us. And so for everything that I do, I try to think about being grateful for those who left this about what is my role for those who are to come after me. So thank you again, Mr. Osoi. We will give you a few more minutes to say some final words to the community, if you would like to, and then I will hand over to Nathan. So Mr. Osoi, if you would like to say something else before closing. So I'll hand it over to you, Nathan. No, Mr. Osoi is here.
Yes, I had actually lost you at some point. Very quickly before Nathan comes or takes the stage, James Olekisir is asking me which viable, sustainable ways can governments introduce to stop further land subdivisions or land allocations or encroachments to especially carbon sinks. I have spoken to the issue of planning. We have a myriad of pieces of legislations, and counties that don't have a planning act can enact that. But importantly, I think it is good to have youth education and intergenerational knowledge transfer so that we can reimagine. We imagine the counties or the lands we occupy, territorial boundaries we occupy today, many generations after we are gone. It is very, very important to look at that. Governments can legislate. Governments needs to be pushed because sometimes they cannot move on their own motion to observe the very statutes or pieces of legislation they enact, and ensure that the community is aware so that we don't just become a yes kind of populace. So I spoke about collaborations or partnerships so that the community, the government, and non-governmental organizations can be involved. And I spoke about the integration of indigenous land practices so that local communities are involved deeply in this and in the national and county land policies. So, James, I think those are some of the ways. Lastly, Nightingale, I think I wish to take this opportunity to thank you most sincerely, and I'm sorry that I came in slightly late due to travels, but I am glad that I have had an extremely engaging audience. Thank you all for being here. I am available to take some questions, and Nightingale will share my contacts, so I could actually put my number, my Kenyan number, on the screen in case you want to text me or WhatsApp. I'm available on WhatsApp. You can always WhatsApp a question or whatever it is that you want to ask me. Thank you very much. Over to you, Nightingale.
Asante sana, Mr. Osoi, and I request every one of us to just follow suit, follow what Hillary did, and just give a clap. I know it's virtual. If we were together in a room, we would clap, we would shout. But because if we shout here, it's going to be chaos. I just ask that if you can, you just do a clap or a like, because I think you're here because you really appreciate what Mr. Osoi had for us. So asante sana once again, and to be continued for sure. So now I would like to hand the meeting over to you, Nathan, so that you can take us through the last piece and over to closing. Nathan Newtman, if you're there.
Thank you, Nightingale. Thank you, Bwana Osoi. Before I share a few brief slides about potential next steps, I want to do a bit of storytelling, and this is about our connection as Acopphe with Mr. Osoi. And we have not known each other very long. It's roughly 1 month. And the person who connected us is here with us in this space. So I wanted to share gratitude for Thomas Herdson, and also just see if Herdson, you would like to speak briefly about yourself or the story of how you connected with Mr. Osoi. No pressure, but just want to make it so that we're a community, even if virtually, and intending to have this, as Nightingale said, be the first of more steps to come, working together. So maybe Herdson, over to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Nathan and Knight. And it's a good privilege to once connect on a virtual call where my good friend, Hon Osoi, is actually presenting. Funny enough, just to bring you to books on how we got to connect with Hon Osoi, I was actually attending some short call, and as we were at the restroom, we just decided to say hello to each other, and from there it was, what are you doing? And you know, I was attending a conference at Tamarind Hotel, and from there I felt that there was an urge to deeply connect with him. And funny enough, I ended up introducing my friend to Knight. And, you know, I'm glad that this relationship morphed to where it is now. And I can't believe what is in store for the future, looking at what is happening now. And of course, the next proceedings of engagements that are gonna be, you know, be laid forward. And just to, you know, give my appreciation to Hon Osoi, I want to say thank you for, you know, being a good friend to our network. And personally, I hope that you're gonna keep this fire burning and, you know, be a part of this ecosystem that is transforming the world and the communities in the era of climate change, but also uniting the voices for a collective global action, also for the grassroots communities. And I want to thank Acopphe for, you know, planning this. And I know even as it as they are planning for the August inaugural Climate Week, this is just a set pace for the greater event that is upcoming. But most profoundly to thank all the beautiful and handsome faces that were able to join in for the call. And from mine to your end, I just want to wish you a wonderful time. And yeah, keep on conquering and let's do it together. Thank you so much. Back to you, Nathan.
Asante Sana Hertzen. So as you said, we have only just begun and looking forward to remaining connected. I will take a few minutes to build off of that opportunity that Hertzen just highlighted. I will try and, looks like I can't present. So maybe Nightingale as the host, or someone else who's the host, if you could bring up the slides, or else maybe make me, let me try and see if I can reclaim host. Okay, so now I should be able to present. So hopefully my screen is going to be visible within a few seconds. So I just want to build off of several themes that we have highlighted during our time together today, which are Indigenous wisdom and planetary health and governance. So our vision for the future is to revive and reconnect to the best of what came before us as passed down from our ancestors, and to try and pass that along to future generations in honor of the land that we share and together with the other species that are part of the community of life. So I just want to take a couple minutes to introduce a process that goes by the title Mara Serengeti Mau One Health Declaration, with the title being Uniting as One to Ground One Health in Local and Indigenous Wisdom. This gives just a few basics that on the 9th of August, Saturday, which is World Day of Indigenous Peoples, and it's also the conclusion of the 1 week of activities that goes by the abbreviation AUCCW, African Universities and Communities Climate Week. We will gather at the entrance to the world famous wonder of the world, Masai Mara, and the Sekenani Gate. And we're also planning to have virtual connection opportunities available in case anyone is not able to be there in person. But what we're planning to do is have a declaration that we're hard at work mobilizing and coordinating with the relevant stakeholders and community members to develop the declaration in the Maasai language, in Swahili, and also English, and hopefully other languages as well. And collectively, we represent a diverse community of values-aligned stakeholders and groups who are interested in striking a harmonious balance between traditional and modern, local and global, and human and non-human needs. And the aspiration, the reason behind this is to heal ourselves and planet Earth by reuniting with our roots in nature. So we enter this collective space with the threshold question that is common to both One Health, which represents human, animal, and environment as one. So One Health and Indigenous wisdom. These questions about how healthy people, healthy animals, and a healthy environment are connected in the greater Mara, Serengeti, and Mau ecosystem and beyond. So our intention is to use this declaration as a unifying tool and mechanism within both Africa and communities around the world. We intend to pursue publishing the declaration in a variety of languages and in various accessible outlets to a wide variety of stakeholders. And we also intend for this to be a participatory process, so soliciting feedback and input and ideas about actualization and implementation and next steps for this declaration from a wide audience. So we invite all of you on the call, whether individually with other friends, family, community members, colleagues, to be a part of this process so that we can draft and discuss and implement the declaration. And we're happy to work with you so that the process is truly inclusive, interactive, and ultimately impactful. So please feel free to reach out to any of the Acopphe members or leaders with your ideas and inputs. We know there are some experts about different languages, including the Maasai language and Swahili, that are fundamental and essential for us to actualize this process and make it positively impactful. And the first step, so that looking ahead to November 3rd, a few months after August 9th, which is One Health Day, we're hoping that looking into the future, we can have a very much grassroots movement of like-minded people and groups who are passionate about these questions and working together to optimize and to harmonize what we do together and how we equitably and justly share in a sustainable way our one home on planet Earth. So welcome to everyone. We also invite you a little over 1 month from now, will be the first Friday of June, when we're planning to highlight the topic of climate. So stay tuned for the next First Friday Global Gathering. And otherwise, we're grateful for your time and looking forward to remaining connected. Back to you, Nightingale. Asante sana. Thank you all.
So yeah, thank you, Nathan. I think that was pretty clear. I don't know if anyone has any questions. Please feel free to reach out. Yeah, we're just putting the information here. Actually, James, if you can just put the email addresses, or Hillary email addresses that we can be reached out at, Acopphe. We can answer regarding any of what was discussed today, or thoughts that come up, or even the declaration. Otherwise, I want to thank every single one of us here for your contributions, your participation, your patience, your understanding. And I think this is it until next time. So I'm going to just put some fun music in case you want to put in some comments here, but really I consider the meeting closed. Thanks to everyone, and see you again next time. Asante.
Bye.